She stood in her white gown before 300 witnesses, believing her carefully crafted image was flawless. But when that screen flickered to life in the middle of her vows, everything she'd hidden came pouring out like blood from a wound. The gasps that filled that hall weren't just shock, they were the sound of a life shattering in real time. What drove a woman to turn the most sacred day of her life into a performance? And what happened when the curtain finally fell? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In a vibrant neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, there lived a woman everyone knew as radiant. She is Amara. From the time she was a teenager, Amara understood something that many people spend their whole lives trying to figure out. Image is currency. While other girls her age were focused on school and weekend hangouts, Amara was studying angles, lighting, and the art of making people believe in a version of herself that existed only through screens. By the time she turned 25, she had cultivated a following of over 80,000 people who watched her every move, her every outfit, her every carefully rehearsed moment of spontaneity. She wasn't just living her life. She was curating it, frame by frame, like a museum exhibit of perfection. Her apartment was filled with ring lights, backdrops, and tripods. Her phone was an extension of her hand. Every meal was photographed before it was tasted. Every emotion was performed before it was felt. And when she got engaged to a man named Marcus, a kind-hearted mechanic who loved her with a simplicity that felt almost old-fashioned, Amara saw not a partner but an opportunity. This wedding, she decided, would be her masterpiece. Marcus was everything Amara was not. He was quiet where she was loud, private where she was public, humble where she was hungry for applause. He worked long hours at his uncle's auto shop, came home smelling like motor oil and honesty, and loved Amara in a way that didn't require documentation. He didn't understand her obsession with being seen, but he accepted it because he believed that beneath all the performance was a woman who genuinely loved him. When Amara told him she wanted a big wedding, something unforgettable, Marcus smiled and nodded. He thought she meant a celebration of their love. What Amara meant was a spectacle. She began planning immediately, not with a wedding coordinator but with a content strategist. She hired 3 separate videographers, a photographer who specialized in viral moments, and a social media manager to live-stream the entire event across multiple platforms. She invited not just family and friends but influencers, minor celebrities, and anyone with a significant following who might amplify her reach. The invitations themselves were designed to be shared, printed on textured paper embedded with QR codes that linked to a countdown website she'd built. Amara wasn't preparing for a wedding. She was launching a campaign. But even in the midst of all this preparation there were warnings. Amara's grandmother, a woman who still attended church every Sunday and believed in things like sacred bonds and divine accountability, pulled her aside one afternoon. "Baby," she said, her voice soft but firm, "a wedding ain't a show. It's a promise before God and witnesses. You turn it into entertainment, you disrespect what it stands for." Amara laughed it off, kissed her grandmother's cheek and said, "Grandma, times have changed. This is how people celebrate now." But her grandmother's eyes stayed worried, and she whispered something under her breath that Amara didn't catch, something about reaping what you sow. There was another warning too, one that came from someone much closer to Amara's age. Her best friend since middle school, Shanice, had always stood in Amara's shadow. Shanice was pretty too, funny too, but she lacked the ruthless ambition that made Amara shine. And over the years, as Amara's following grew and opportunities came knocking, Shanice felt herself becoming invisible. She smiled through it, played the supportive friend, but inside, something dark was growing. Envy, thick and corrosive, eating away at whatever genuine affection had once been there. When Amara announced her engagement, Shanice congratulated her with a hug that lasted a second too long and eyes that didn't quite smile. "I'm so happy for you," Shanice said, and Amara believed her because she wanted to. What Amara didn't know was that Shanice had been collecting pieces of her for years. Screenshots of unguarded moments, videos Amara thought were deleted, private conversations saved and filed away like ammunition. Shanice had convinced herself that she was just being cautious, just keeping receipts in case Amara ever turned on her. But the truth was darker than that. Shanice wanted to see Amara fall. Not because she hated her, but because she couldn't stand watching her win anymore. And now, with this wedding being broadcast to the world, Shanice saw her chance. She started small, offering to help with planning, volunteering to manage some of the behind-the-scenes logistics. Amara, overwhelmed and eager for assistance, welcomed her in without hesitation. She gave Shanice access to files, passwords, video footage. She trusted her because they were best friends, and best friends don't betray each other. Except when they do. As the wedding date approached, Amara became more consumed with the production than the marriage itself. She rehearsed her vows a dozen times, not to make them heartfelt but to make them quotable. She choreographed her entrance to a playlist that would trend. She even planned out which moments would be clipped for reels and which would be saved for long-form content. Marcus watched all of this with growing unease, but every time he tried to express concern, Amara dismissed him. "Baby, this is important," she'd say, scrolling through analytics on her phone. "This is our moment." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't their moment at all. It was hers. And he was just a prop in her production. If you're still watching, remember to subscribe to enjoy more of this. Unknown to everyone, the cameras Amara invited would soon become the very instruments of her undoing. Because while she was busy crafting the perfect image, Shanice was busy dismantling it. And the footage she'd been collecting, the secrets she'd been hoarding, were about to be revealed in the most public, most humiliating way imaginable. The wedding was set for a warm Saturday evening in late June. The venue was an upscale garden estate with sprawling lawns, fairy lights strung between oak trees, and a massive LED screen that would display curated highlights throughout the event. Amara had spared no expense. The dress alone cost more than Marcus made in 3 months, a custom gown with hand-sewn beading that caught the light like trapped starlight. Everything was perfect. Everything was planned. And yet, as the sun began to set on the evening before the ceremony, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Dark, heavy, and rumbling with something that felt almost like a warning. Marcus stood in the small dressing room of the venue the night before the wedding, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him. Somewhere along the way in the months of planning and preparation, he'd stopped being Marcus and started being the groom, a character in Amara's narrative. His opinions had been overridden, his preferences dismissed, his discomfort ignored. He loved Amara, or at least he loved the woman he thought she was, but lately he wasn't sure who that woman even was anymore. He heard a knock at the door and turned to see his older brother, Terrence, standing there with 2 bottles of beer and a knowing look. "You good?" Terrence asked, handing him a bottle. Marcus took it but didn't drink. "I don't know, man. I feel like I'm marrying a stranger." Terrence sat down on the worn leather couch and sighed. "You know what Mama used to say? You can't love someone who's too busy performing to be present." Amara's always been about the image, Marcus. You knew that going in. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I thought marriage would change that. I thought once we made it official, she'd settle down, you know? Stop chasing the validation and just be with me." Terrence gave him a long look. "And if she doesn't?" Marcus didn't have an answer for that. Meanwhile, across the estate in the bridal suite, Amara was surrounded by chaos. Makeup artists, hairstylists, her social media manager barking instructions into a headset, and Shanice, ever-present and ever-helpful, organizing last-minute details with an efficiency that felt almost mechanical. Amara sat in the center of it all like a queen on a throne, scrolling through comments on her latest post. Thousands of people were already buzzing about the wedding, sharing countdowns, speculating about her dress, tagging their friends. She felt a rush of satisfaction. This was what she'd worked for. This was her validation. "Amara, you need to put the phone down," her mother said gently but firmly. "You're getting married tomorrow. Can you just be present for one night?" Amara looked up, irritation flashing across her face. "Mama, this is my job. People are counting on me to deliver content." Her mother shook her head sadly. "Content? You're about to make vows before God, and all you can think about is content." Amara didn't respond. She just went back to scrolling. Shanice watched this exchange from the corner of the room, a small smile playing on her lips. Everything was going according to plan. The rehearsal dinner that night was elegant and well-attended, filled with laughter, toasts, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Amara made sure every moment was captured, directing photographers like a film director on set. She gave a speech that was equal parts heartfelt and performative, thanking everyone for being part of their journey and reminding them to tag her in any posts they made. Marcus gave a quieter speech, one that spoke of love and commitment and partnership, and while people clapped politely, Amara was already thinking about how she'd edit the footage later. After dinner, as guests mingled and music played softly in the background, Shanice approached Marcus. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Marcus, grateful for any distraction from his swirling thoughts, nodded and followed her to a quieter corner of the garden. "I just wanted to say," Shanice began, her eyes soft with what looked like genuine concern, "I hope you know what you're getting into. Amara's my girl, but she can be a lot. And I'd hate to see you get hurt. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Shanice hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. Just that sometimes Amara gets so caught up in the image that she forgets about the people behind it. I've seen her do it to friends, to family. I just hope she doesn't do it to you. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but before he could respond, Amara appeared, smiling brightly and looping her arm through his. There you are. Come on, babe, we need to get some shots by the fountain before we lose the light. And just like that, Marcus was pulled back into the production, Shanice's words echoing in his mind like a prophecy. That night, alone in his hotel room, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was making a mistake. He thought about calling the whole thing off, about sitting Amara down and having a real, honest conversation about what marriage meant to him. But then he thought about the guests who would be arriving in less than 12 hours, the vendors who had been paid, the expectations that had been set. And he felt trapped, caught in a current he couldn't escape. Across town, in her own hotel suite, Amara was wide awake too, but for entirely different reasons. She was editing footage, color-correcting photos, drafting captions for posts that would go live throughout the next day. She felt alive, electric, buzzing with the anticipation of what was to come. Tomorrow she would be the bride everyone talked about. Tomorrow she would trend. Tomorrow she would finally have proof that she mattered, that she was seen, that she was enough. She didn't think about Marcus once. And in a third location, in a small apartment filled with bitterness and carefully curated revenge, Shanice sat at her laptop, uploading a video file to a secure cloud server. The file was labeled Wedding Day Surprise. Tomorrow the world would see the real her. And Shanice would be there to watch it all burn. If you're still watching, drop a comment with, "I'm still here," so we know who's riding this case out with us. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the storm clouds from the night before having passed, leaving behind a sky so blue it looked almost unreal. Amara woke early, not from nerves but from excitement. Today was her day. Today, everything she'd worked for would come to fruition. She went through her morning routine like a ritual. Green juice, skincare, meditation, all documented for her followers. By the time her glam team arrived, she was already in performance mode, smiling for the camera, narrating her process, making everything look effortless. Marcus, on the other hand, woke with a knot in his stomach that wouldn't loosen. He went through the motions of getting ready, putting on his tuxedo, accepting congratulations from groomsmen who slapped him on the back and made jokes about the old ball and chain. But inside he felt hollow. He kept thinking about what his brother had said, what Shanice had said, what his own instincts were screaming at him. But it was too late to turn back now. Or was it? As guests began to arrive at the venue, the energy was electric. People posed for photos, admired the decor, and whispered about how beautiful everything was. The massive LED screen displayed a looping montage of Amara and Marcus's relationship, carefully edited to look like a fairy tale. No one noticed Shanice in the corner, working on a laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 6 in the evening, just as the sun started its descent, casting everything in that golden, Instagram-perfect light that Amara had planned for. Guests filled the rows of white chairs arranged on the lawn, fanning themselves with programs that featured QR codes linking to the couple's registry and social media pages. The atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation, not just for a wedding but for an event that many knew would be all over their feeds by morning. 3 separate camera crews positioned themselves at strategic angles. A drone hovered overhead, capturing aerial footage. Amara had even hired a documentarian to create a feature-length film of the day, something she planned to release in episodes across her platforms. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a multi-platform content rollout. And Amara was the executive producer, director, and star all at once. As the string quartet began to play, the bridal party made their entrance. Bridesmaids in lavender gowns that Amara had selected not for how they looked on the women but for how they photographed. Groomsmen in charcoal suits that Marcus had been told to approve without question. And then, finally, the music shifted to the bridal march, and every head turned toward the back of the aisle. Amara appeared like a vision, her dress catching the light in ways that seemed almost supernatural. She'd practiced this walk dozens of times, knew exactly how to move to maximize the dramatic effect, where to pause for the cameras, when to let a single tear fall for the close-up. As she walked down the aisle, she wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking at the guests, at their reactions, at the phones being raised to capture her moment. She was performing, and the audience was captivated. Marcus stood at the altar, watching her approach, and felt something crack inside him. She was beautiful, breathtaking even, but she wasn't walking toward him. When she finally reached him and took his hands, her smile was radiant but distant, like she was looking through him rather than at him. The officiant, an older man who had known Marcus's family for years, began the ceremony with traditional words about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. But even as he spoke, cameras clicked, the drone hummed overhead, and Amara's social media manager live-tweeted key moments with pre-written captions. The vows were next. Amara had insisted on writing her own, and when her turn came, she delivered them with the polish of a practiced speaker. Every word was chosen for impact, every pause calculated for effect. She spoke about destiny, about finding your person, about building a life together that would inspire others. It was beautiful. It was moving. It was completely hollow. When Marcus delivered his vows, he spoke from the heart. No script, no performance, just raw honesty about loving someone and hoping that love would be enough. His voice cracked at one point and a few guests dabbed at their eyes. But Amara was already thinking about how the footage would cut together, whether his emotional moment would make the highlight reel. She squeezed his hands and smiled, but there was something mechanical about it, something that made the officiant pause and glance at her with concern. Then came the moment that would change everything. The officiant began to transition into the exchange of rings, but before he could continue, the massive LED screen behind them flickered. At first, people thought it was part of the program, another curated video montage. But then the image that appeared wasn't the romantic footage they'd been watching earlier. It was something else entirely. The screen showed Amara in her apartment, late at night, talking to someone off camera. But it wasn't Marcus. It was another man, someone the guests didn't recognize. And the conversation wasn't innocent. The audio was crystal clear, amplified through the venue's speaker system. Amara's voice, flirtatious and intimate, saying things that made the audience gasp. The man responding, laughing, making plans. And then the footage cut to another clip, and another, a compilation of moments that Amara thought had been deleted, moments that showed a version of herself she'd never intended anyone to see. The gasps started small, scattered murmurs of confusion, but within seconds they grew into a wave of shock that rippled through the crowd. People pointed at the screen, covered their mouths, looked from the footage to Amara and back again. Marcus stood frozen, his face draining of color as he watched his fiancée on a screen larger than life, betraying him in high definition. Amara's smile faltered. She turned to look at the screen, and when she saw what was playing, her entire body went rigid. "Turn it off," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then louder, almost a scream, "Turn it off." But no one moved. The tech crew was scrambling, trying to cut the feed, but the video kept playing. More clips, more evidence, a carefully curated exposé designed to destroy her credibility and humiliate her in the most public way possible. And in the crowd, Shanice sat in the third row, her face carefully neutral, watching her plan unfold exactly as she'd designed it. The officiant tried to intervene, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be a technical difficulty. If we could just..." But his voice was drowned out by the murmurs, the exclamations, the sound of 300 people reacting in real time to a scandal unfolding before their eyes. Amara turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with panic. "Marcus, this isn't..." But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the screen, watching footage of the woman he was about to marry laughing with another man, making promises she never intended to keep. "Now let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone completely only to have that trust shattered in the most public, most humiliating way possible? How would you feel standing there, in front of everyone you know, watching your reality crumble? Think about that as we continue. And if you're feeling this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what you would do in Marcus's position. Your engagement means everything to us." Amara reached for Marcus's arm, but he pulled away. The look on his face wasn't anger, not yet. It was something worse. Disappointment so deep it looked like grief. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice shaking. "It's not what it looks like. Somebody's trying to sabotage me. This is all fake. You have to believe me." But even as she said it, she knew how it sounded. The footage was too clear, too detailed, too obviously real. And Marcus, standing there in his tuxedo that suddenly felt too tight, could see the truth written all over her face. Not just the truth about the affair, but the truth about everything. About who she really was, about what she really valued, about how little he had ever truly mattered to her. The screen finally went black, but the damage was done. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Amara's breathing and the distant hum of the drone still circling overhead, capturing every moment of her humiliation for posterity. People started to stand, uncertain whether to leave or stay, whether to comfort or condemn. Amara's mother rushed forward, her face a mask of horror. "Baby, what is this? What have you done?" Amara couldn't answer. She just stood there, frozen in her perfect dress, under her perfect lighting in her perfect venue, watching her perfect life disintegrate. And then Marcus did something no one expected. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply took off the ring he'd been about to place on her finger, set it carefully on the altar and walked away. Not ran. Walked. With the kind of quiet dignity that spoke louder than any outburst could have. The cameras, still rolling, captured every step. Amara watched him go, and something inside her shattered. Not her image, not her reputation, but something deeper, something that had been barely holding on. She tried to follow him, calling his name, but her legs wouldn't move. Or maybe they did move, because suddenly she was running, barefoot across the lawn, her dress catching on chairs and dragging through grass, chasing after a man who no longer wanted to be caught. "Marcus, please. Marcus, wait," she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. But Marcus didn't stop. He didn't even turn around. He just kept walking toward the parking lot, toward his car, toward a future that no longer included her. And behind them, the guests stood in stunned silence, phones out, recording every second, turning Amara's worst moment into content that would be shared, dissected, and memed across the internet for days to come. The wedding that was supposed to trend for all the right reasons became infamous for all the wrong ones. Within hours, clips of the screen malfunction were everywhere. Social media erupted with speculation, judgment, and that particular brand of cruelty that thrives online. People who had followed Amara for years, who had celebrated her engagement and counted down to her wedding, now turned on her with vicious efficiency. Her comment sections filled with accusations, her follower count plummeted, and brands that had been in talks for partnerships quietly backed away. The wedding was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Amara spent the first night after the ceremony in her hotel room, still in her wedding dress because she couldn't bring herself to take it off. Taking it off would mean accepting that it was real, that it had actually happened. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, notifications, and calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Media outlets wanted statements. Former friends wanted answers. Her family wanted explanations she didn't have. She ignored all of it and sat in the darkness, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of exposure settle over her like a shroud. Her mother came to check on her around midnight, letting herself in with the spare key card. She found Amara sitting on the floor by the window, makeup smeared, hair undone, looking like a ghost of the radiant bride from just hours before. "Baby," her mother said softly, sitting down beside her. "Talk to me." Amara shook her head. "There's nothing to say, Mama. It's over. Everything's over." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Who did this to you?" Amara laughed bitterly. "Does it matter? I did it to myself. I invited the cameras. I made everything public. I turned my life into a performance, and now everyone's seen the worst part of the show." Her mother took her hand, squeezed it gently. "That man in the video. Was it real?" Amara closed her eyes. The man in the video was real. His name was Devon, and he'd been a mistake she'd made 3 months before the wedding, a moment of weakness when the pressure of planning and performing had become too much. It had meant nothing to her, just an escape, a brief respite from being the person everyone expected her to be. She'd ended it after one night, deleted everything she could find, and convinced herself it was buried. But Shanice had known. Shanice had always known. Because Amara had confided in her, trusted her with the secret, believed that best friends kept each other's confessions. And Shanice had kept it all right. Kept it like a weapon waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "It was real," Amara finally whispered. "But it was over. It didn't mean anything. I was going to marry Marcus. I loved Marcus." Her mother's grip tightened. "Did you? Or did you love what he represented? The good guy, the stable choice, the man who would make you look like you had it all together?" The question hit Amara like a slap, and she realized she didn't have an answer. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she'd never really loved Marcus at all. Maybe she'd just loved the idea of him, the way he fit into her narrative, the way he made her look to the outside world. And if that was true, then maybe she deserved everything that had happened. The next morning, Amara finally took off the dress, folded it carefully, and placed it in the closet like she was burying something. She showered, washed off the remnants of yesterday's makeup, and stared at herself in the mirror for a long time. Without the filters, without the lighting, without the performance, who was she? She didn't know anymore. She tried to call Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again the next day and the next, leaving increasingly desperate messages that went unanswered. Finally, his brother Terrence called her back. He doesn't want to talk to you, Amara? Not now. Maybe not ever. Amara felt her throat tighten. Can you just tell him I'm sorry? Please? Tell him I never meant to hurt him. There was a long pause, then Terence spoke, his voice heavy with something that sounded like pity. You know what the worst part is? It's not even the cheating. It's that you cared more about those cameras than you did about him. You made him a prop in your show and he finally realized it. That's what broke him, Amara. Not the affair. The fact that you never saw him as real. The line went dead and Amara sat there, phone in hand, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. She had done this. Not Shanice, not the cameras, not the internet. She had prioritized image over substance, performance over presence, validation over love. And now she was paying the price. In the days that followed, Amara tried to rebuild. She posted an apology video, carefully scripted and tearful, taking responsibility for her actions and asking for forgiveness. But the internet is not a forgiving place, especially for women who fall from pedestals of their own making. The video was dissected, criticized, and turned into memes. People questioned her sincerity, accused her of playing the victim, and reminded her that consequences are real. Her follower count continued to drop. Sponsorships evaporated. Even her closest friends distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with her scandal. And through it all, Shanice watched from the sidelines, her own following growing as people flocked to her for insider details about what Amara was really like behind the scenes. Shanice played her role perfectly, the loyal friend who had been hurt by betrayal, the victim of Amara's narcissism, the truth-teller who had simply exposed what needed to be exposed. She never admitted to being behind the video. She didn't have to. People assumed it had leaked somehow, that Amara's carelessness had caught up with her. And Shanice let them believe it, all while building her own platform on the ashes of Amara's reputation. 6 months later, Amara ran into Marcus at a coffee shop on the east side of town. It was the first time she'd seen him since the wedding, and the sight of him made her chest ache. He looked different, thinner, tired, but somehow more at peace. He was with a woman, someone Amara didn't recognize, and they were laughing about something, their hands intertwined on the table between them. Amara almost turned around and left, but Marcus saw her before she could escape. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw in his expression something that hurt more than anger, indifference. She was no longer important enough to hate. She was just someone he used to know. Amara nodded at him, a small acknowledgement, and he nodded back. Then he returned his attention to the woman across from him, and Amara walked out of the coffee shop, out of his life, and into a future that felt emptier than she'd ever imagined possible. But this story doesn't end there. Because 6 months after that, something unexpected happened. Amara was working a regular job now, managing social media for a small nonprofit that helped young girls build self-esteem without relying on external validation. The irony wasn't lost on her. She kept a low profile, stayed off her personal accounts, and tried to figure out who she was when no one was watching. One evening, she received a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a long, rambling confession from Shanice. In the message, Shanice admitted everything. That she'd been the one to upload the video, that she'd planned it for months, that she'd wanted to destroy Amara because she couldn't stand watching her win anymore. But now, Shanice wrote, the guilt was eating her alive. She'd gotten the following she wanted, the attention she craved, but it felt hollow because it was built on someone else's pain. She was sorry. She wanted forgiveness. Amara read the message 3 times, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger, vindication, and something that might have been pity. She thought about responding, about accepting the apology or rejecting it. But in the end she did neither. She simply deleted the message and blocked the number. Because she realized that forgiveness wasn't something Shanice deserved or didn't deserve. It was something Amara needed to give herself. She needed to forgive herself for prioritizing the wrong things, for hurting someone who loved her, for losing herself in the pursuit of being seen. Years passed. Amara never went back to content creation, never tried to rebuild her following, never chased the validation she'd once craved. She found fulfillment in smaller, quieter ways. In genuine friendships, in work that mattered, in moments that didn't need to be documented to be real. She heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus had gotten married, that he was happy, that he'd found someone who loved him the way he deserved to be loved. And she was glad. Truly, genuinely glad. Because she'd learned something essential in the wreckage of that wedding. Real love doesn't need an audience. Real connection doesn't require performance. And real worth isn't measured in followers, likes, or views. It's measured in presence, in honesty, in the willingness to be seen not as perfect but as human. Amara never married. She had relationships that mattered, people who knew her truly and loved her anyway, but she never walked down another aisle. Some wounds leave scars and some lessons are learned only once. She kept the wedding dress, though, folded carefully in the back of her closet. Not as a reminder of shame, but as a marker of transformation. The day she stopped performing and started living. So let me ask you this. If you were in Amara's position, if you'd spent your entire life building an image only to watch it crumble in front of everyone you knew, what would you do? Would you have the strength to rebuild, to find yourself in the ruins? And what about Marcus? Do you think he deserved an apology, or was walking away the only closure he needed? I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you would have done differently. Tell us if you think Amara deserved what happened or if Shanice went too far. These conversations matter, and your perspective adds depth to the story. And if this story moved you, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories we bring to you. Because every story we tell is designed to make you feel, to make you think. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, a covenant is sacred.